After a frustrating week in which Arsenal fans were forced to confront the fragility of their squad, it would have undoubtedly been extremely satisfying to see their team overcome Leicester City with what felt like blunt force determination. After a first half which saw Mikel Arteta fumble with an untested and unreliable front line of Raheem Sterling and Leandro Trossard, the Arsenal manager then opted for a more straightforward approach by throwing defensive midfielder Mikel Merino up front. As we all know, Merino ended up scoring 2 goals in the match, but rather than being a game which showcased what the midfielder can do in the opposing box, it was another game in which we saw the tenacity and remarkable resilience of an Arsenal side that simply refused to give up on their hope of challenging for the Premier League this season. And while Liverpool have absolutely no intention of giving up their lead at the top of the Premier League table, the progress that Arsenal have made to become the second best team in England is undoubtedly deserving of praise in itself. Indeed, now in their 3rd successive season of challenging for the Premier League title, it's easy to forget that Arsenal really have no right to be near the top of the league table when we consider their financial standing compared to some of the biggest clubs in England. Although Arteta has made 6 of the club's 10 most expensive signings ever in the last 10 seasons, with some notable big signings like Kai Havertz and Declan Rice, the North London club's spending has actually been rather tame in comparison to the other big hitters in the Premier League. For example, in the last 5 seasons, Arsenal's net spend on transfer fees stands at €556 million. That may seem like a lot, but only places them 4th in English football behind Chelsea, Manchester United and Tottenham, 3 clubs that fans of the Gunners will happily note have received far fewer returns for their investments in the transfer window in recent years. And when we take a look at the club's pure expenditure on new players, it comes in 5th in the league, €783 million. That, crucially, is €186 million less than what Manchester City have spent on new players, while largely offsetting their investments in the first-team squad with the sale of dozens of academy players over the years. Arsenal's success in recent seasons is also underlined when we consider their wage bill in comparison to other clubs in England. According to Forbes, the North London club have an annual wage bill of €384 million, which is the 5th largest in the Premier League, behind Chelsea in 4th, Man United in 3rd, Liverpool in 2nd and Man City in 1st, with an annual wage bill that reportedly stands at £97.2 million, more than the one Arteta has to work with each and every year. To put that extra €97.2 million in Man City's wage bill into perspective, it's enough to pay Erling Haaland, Mohamed Salah and Kevin De Bruyne alongside the Arsenal squad, and still have enough left over to sign another Martin Odegaard or Declan Rice. That of course excludes transfer fees, but the point still stands. The fact that Arsenal are capable of challenging and in many ways surpassing these clubs in the Premier League is a huge achievement. To do this, Arsenal get more for less in the transfer market. As previously noted, the club have spent €783 million on new players in the last 5 seasons, but 74% of that money was spent on signing just 11 players. As we can see in this pie chart, 25% of that budget was Havertz and Rice's transfer fees alone, and while there are some players that haven't quite lived up to the billing, like Gabriel Jesus, Fabio Vieira and perhaps even Alexander Zinchenko, the vast majority of Arsenal's signings in the last 5 years have been important additions to the team. In other words, Arsenal's hit rate in the transfer market has been remarkably solid, and in turn it has been the backbone of their strategy when it comes to leapfrogging clubs in the Premier League with bigger budgets. Interestingly enough, when we then make the direct comparison to Manchester City's spending the last 5 seasons, we find that they too have 11 signings that make up 75% of their total spending on new players. But unlike Arsenal, they have a number of players that haven't lived up to the high price tags, such as Jack Grealish, Matheus Nunes, Jeremy Doku and Calvin Phillips, while 3 of their January transfer signings also make it into the higher tier of signings in Marmoush, Gonzalez and Kusanov. Now, it obviously remains to be seen whether the €175 million Man City spent on those 3 players in January will prove to be good money spent, or all 3 of them could end up being transfer flops. But it's worth noting that the €40 million they spent on Kusanov alone would have made him Mikel Arteta's 7th most expensive signing as Arsenal manager. Whereas with Pep Guardiola, he doesn't even rank in the top 20 signings made by the Manchester City manager in England. Arsenal's focus on spending big on fewer players also translates over to the wages of each team too. As we previously noted, Arsenal have the 5th largest wage bill in the Premier League, but according to Capology, the North London club have no fewer than 9 players in the top 50 highest earners in the English top flight. Among the Premier League's traditional Big 6 clubs, Only Man City have more players in the top 50 with 13, but notably Arsenal have more than Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United and Tottenham. Here again we can see the club-specific approach to the market play out differently from their rivals. For example, while Chelsea have an annual wage bill that's reportedly €12 million higher than Arsenal's per year, the North London club roughly pay Declan Rice as much as their Stamford Bridge rivals pay for the services of Ben Chilwell, Kieran Dewsbury-Hall and Hal Felix. One club has opted to use most of the resources to sign fewer players of higher quality, while another has decided to spread their resources out to sign a number of players of varying quality. And while Chelsea's transfer policy remains a mystery to most, Arsenal's strategy in the transfer market has clearly allowed Arteta to build one of the best teams in English football. However, there are obvious pitfalls to using this strategy to build a squad in the Premier League. For example, while Arsenal do have an impressive front line, their backup players of Trossard, Sterling and Gabriel Jesus simply aren't up to scratch, and the club still don't have a long-term or ready-made replacement for Martin Odegaard should he drop off in form or pick up an injury. Equally, while Thomas Partey and Jorginho have been pretty decent this season, should someone like Declan Rice pick up a long-term injury, that midfield would likely crumble if Mikel Arteta was expected to step in for the England international for a long period of time. Which brings us back to the predicament Arsenal are in now. While fans were clamouring for the club to spend money on a number of positions in the January transfer window, Arteta and his backroom staff seemed more intent on making the daring move for Aston Villa striker Ollie Watkins. And while that may have puzzled most of the fan base, it certainly fits in with the English club's policy of signing proven players that can immediately improve their squad, as opposed to spending around €90 million on 3 or 4 players that may or may not turn into reliable starters for Arteta's team. Considering Arsenal's rich history in English football and the fans' clamour to win their first league title since 2004, you can certainly understand why many of them were hoping the club would throw this orthodoxy to the wind and spend money in the hope of bolstering the squad in January to catch up and perhaps surpass Liverpool in the title race. But the club could certainly argue that had they caved into temptation in every transfer window over the course of the last 5 years, Arteta's team would be full of short-term fixes rather than this carefully curated squad that is now punching above its weight and going for his 3rd consecutive title challenge. As such, Arsenal currently find themselves at the crossroads of reason and fandom, where logic and emotions have locked horns and are trying to outmuscle the other for control of what the club should do next. But even that need to succeed at all costs right now dismisses the achievements that have been made to date. And while it will come as absolutely no solace to fans of the club if they find themselves finishing second for a 3rd successive league campaign in May, it really can't be overstated how well Arteta and co have done to get the club to this spot in the first place. Whether it be clever transfer signings or smart use of the wage bill or even using Mikel Arteta as a makeshift striker in the opposing box, Arteta's team continue to outthink and outperform the richer Premier League rivals. And that's something that has to be celebrated in May by Arsenal fans, regardless of whether they finish this season as Premier League champions or not.